You need to know this trick for the best Latin music bass lines. Yo, what's up? Welcome to another video. My name is 7beat and today I'm gonna show you how to create a Latin pop beat in FL Studio. So Latin pop is a very broad term and it could be specified into various subgenres. But today I'm going to show you how to create a beat which is kind of similar to reggaeton. It contains some of the same elements and I'm going to show you all the essential tricks you need to know. So let's get started. So first we're going to start off with the drums. So normally those beats are created between 80 and 100 BPM. So in this case the beat will be in 93 beats per minute. So the drums for these beats will still contain the general reggaeton rhythm. So starting off with this kick. Then we're adding that Latin rhythm, adding one kick at 3/4 of the first step and then adding it at the second beat. So we're creating this rhythm. But this rhythm is used in a lot of reggaeton beats. So we're going to add one note right here and this switches up the whole rhythm. And the third step is to spice up the kick using some percussion. So for example, a cymbal, this hi-hat. So it sounds like this. And then we're layering it with the snare with the kick. We're just adding more details and color to the drum loop. Just some small details which in the end will make a huge difference. Then we're adding this head. And then we're using another hi-hat to add some more rhythm. So we're using this pattern and we're playing around with the velocity control. So without making changes to the velocity, it sounds like this. By changing up the velocity, we're adding a lot more rhythm and dynamics to the drum loop. Sounds so groovy. So by using the right rhythms, for example, this one, you add a lot of rhythm to a beat like this, which is essential when it comes to a Latin beat. It just has to be groovy and danceable. And then last but not least, we're adding this amazing hi-hat loop. And we could simply use this to spice up the arrangement in the end. So if you're interested in the drums which I'm using the URBANO drum kit from the URBANO producer bundle. So the URBANO producer bundle contains some awesome bass one-shots, midis, drums, melody loops, percussion loops, all the samples, midis, everything you need for creating awesome Latin inspired music. And it contains over 1,000 sounds. And there is also a free preview available, the link will be in the description, make sure to check it out. So right now, let's add some melodies. So in most of those Latin beats, some unique chord sounds I use. So we're using simple chords, but we're using unique synths. So for this beat, I'm using the Massive X, and I'm using the Cool Dynamic preset, which sounds like this. So we're creating this beat in A minor, and I've created this chord progression. Very jazz inspired. So again, I've played around with the velocity of each of the samples. If you, for example, just want to change the bass notes, you could simply select them, press Option and then scroll up and down. So this way it's very easy to make manual adjustments. Also make sure this chord progression isn't quantized because you want to make sure some of the notes are offbeat. Add some uniqueness to the chord progression and add some more rhythm, exactly what you want to aim for when it comes to creating Latin pop beats. And then we add some reverb, we add some chorus, and we sidechain this chord progression to add some more rhythm and make sure it blends very well together with the drums. So this is the first layer, and then we're adding a second layer. So we're using another random preset from Contact the Cloud Supply, Frozen Ocean. And we're using the exact same chord progression, but I've shortened down the notes, quantized the chord progression. So this plug layer is rooted to the Cool plug, so I'm using the exact same effects, but we're adding this tremolo delay. So you don't notice this one right away, but it just adds some more ambience to the chord progression. And then let's add a vocal sample, because vocal samples are often used in those beats. And then we're using Arcade, which contains some awesome vocal samples. If you want to check out this plugin, check out the link in the description. So we're using the By the Fire preset, and we're adding this vocal sample. which sounds like a very weird, warped sound. But then we're adding some effects, so adding some air, we're adding this retro color, Divine Alarm preset, and adding some reverb, while making sure we're just using the high frequencies, so we're removing the low frequencies to avoid any muddiness within the mix. We're using this fruity stereo enhancer, and last but not least, we're sidechaining this vocal sample. Oh, sounds amazing, and we're adding a lot of atmosphere to the beat. So right now we want to add another layer to make it more interesting and keep the beat interesting. And in most of the cases in those beats, some weird elements are used. So I used a key one shot from the URBANO one shot kit. I've used key 12, which is a really weird, fluty sounding preset. And then we open up the sampler, envelope, and we create a square. And then again, we're adding a lot of effects, basically adding some chorus, reverb, and we're sidechaining it again. So let's have a listen. Then I've added another layer which just adds a lot of rhythm. And I've used the Thrunky preset from the Mini Freak, which again, I highly recommend this plugin when you're creating those types of beats. It contains some awesome presets ready to use and just very, very easy to apply to your beats. So for this one, just add some reverb, just to add some more room. And it sounds like this. Following the exact same chord progression. So I've added this melody to the offbeat steps, which adds some rhythm to the beat. So it's not playing together with the kick, but it's kind of an addition to the snare. So this is in the end a simple trick how to add more rhythm to your beat. So right now let's get to the fun part, adding the bass lines. So for this beat, first we're starting off with a simple saw bass for the intro. And in the URBANO producer bundle, I've added some bass one shots and I'm using bass 7. So this is the sample which I'm using. Again, we're creating a square to take fully control of the sample. And this is our bass line. Just playing the root notes from the chord progression. Sounds like some frequency modulated bass. I think it sounds really cool, very easy to use in your beats. You don't need any expensive plugins. Pre-mixed, pre-leveled, ready to use. So in the intro, we're using this element. So for this beat, we're using 3 bass lines. So right now let's move on to the second bass line. So we're using this bass one shot, but I'm also using a sub bass one shot. So I've also added those ones to the URBANO one shot kit. So we're using this sample and I'm using this rhythm, which is basically following the kick and the snare rhythm. So by shortening this one, just add some more groove to the drum loop. So when we play it together with the drums, and then secondly, we want to make sure it's sidechained with the kick to avoid any muddiness, avoid any collisions in the low frequency spectrum. So we add this kickstart too. We make sure we sidechain the kick to the bass. So we're using sidechain to this track. Then we select kick 15 on sidechain LR processing. And then we select audio and we select just this 3-punch curve. Makes it way easier in the end when mixing the beat. Just sounds so clean. So this is our first bass line. So this is the first bass line, but in most of the beats we're switching up the bass line after, for example, 8 or 16 bars, because otherwise it's getting way too repetitive. So let's move on to the second bass line. And this is basically the exact same bass line we've used previously, but then I've pitched up some notes 1 octave. So first we were using this rhythm, but then we're selecting these notes like this. And then we're pitching those ones up 1 octave by pressing Command arrow up. So right now we're creating this bass line. Adds an insane amount of groove to the bass line. So let's layer it with the drums. So a very easy method how to switch up the drums. You don't even have to mess around with different notes, just one octave up always sounds good. But one thing to keep in mind is if the bass notes are already playing a very high key, so they don't contain a lot of low frequencies, and you're pitching them up one octave, you could basically destroy the bass line. So you want to make sure that these bass notes, those ones, contain enough low frequencies, so there still is a bass line. So most of the beats, a reverb, drowned out drum loop is used in the intro. So I've also added 39 percussion loops, which are very easy to use. So for this beat I've used percussion loop 24. So we'll basically drag it into the arrangement, add a rally stretch to the tempo of the project, and it's just another amazing layer in the intro. Just totally switches up the vibe. So by using these loops, it's very easy to add something like this to your beat. So right now, let me show you a simple trick how to improve your drums. So most of the people are playing all the drums in the middle of the stereo image, but you want to make sure you give them an individual space within the stereo image. And you can simply do this by panning those elements. So we're, for example, just panning the snare 10% to the left, panning some elements 10% to the right, it makes a huge difference. So if you're listening on headphones, you can hear the stereo separation. And what's amazing about this trick, you don't hear it right away. So you're separating the elements, make them come through in the mix, but you don't directly notice it. So this is exactly what you want to achieve. And you could also apply the same trick to the melodies. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. So let's listen to the final result.